Doug Ford. Doug Ford, again, keeps continuing to pop up in the timeline here. Doug Ford is set to call a snap election next week, sending Ontario voters to the polls February 27th. That's the last Thursday in February, according to Globe and Mail here. So it states Ontario Premier Doug Ford plans to launch a snap provincial election campaign next week, sending voters to the polls on February 27th, says. There has been speculation for months that Mr. Ford was preparing to call an early election, far ahead of the province's fixed election date next year. In recent weeks, he has been hinting that he needs a strong mandate before responding to U.S. President Donald Trump's promised tariffs on Canadian goods, saying that they would cost Ontario 500,000 jobs. A progressive conservative party told the Globe and Mail on Thursday that Mr. Ford will start the campaign next Wednesday. The Globe is not naming the source, who is not authorized to publicly disclose the plans. The premier, speaking to reporters earlier this Thursday, insisted he could campaign even while he leads the province and the country's other premiers in the fight against Mr. Trump's threatened 25% tariffs, which the president said could start February 1st. Again, all these outlets continuously do the exact same thing. They leave out the important part. Unless Canada fixes its border problem. We could easily avoid that. We could easily avoid all this, but every publication I've seen from City News, CTV, CBC, Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, they all leave out the big thing. It's an ultimatum. There's a choice. It's not like Donald Trump is going to bully Canada just for the sake of it. No, he's putting a possible tariff on if we don't secure our border, if we don't deal with our migrant crisis, if we don't deal with the fentanyl problem, which is why Danielle Smith went down to Mar-a-Lago to speak directly to Trump and negotiate a deal, and that's why we have an extension till February 1st. If it wasn't for her, it would be already starting. We'd be already dealing with the tariffs. But they leave that completely out of the conversation. It's no, Mr. Trump is going to throw tariffs on Canada just cuz. Mr. Ford also said he would remain as the head of the Council of the Federation, which consists of Canada's 13 premiers. Mr. Ford, along with other premiers, is traveling to Washington to meet with U.S. lawmakers this month, even as his party is set to make this pitch to voters back home. We can call back cabinet at any time, he said in an event in Mississauga, and I'm going to continue being the chair of the COF. Mr. Ford said he would be making the case for Ontario and Canada and Washington on February 11th and 12th, and February 20th, the second date, just a week before voting day. But the premier defended the idea of a snap election. Isn't it great? I'll have the opportunity, which I already do, to meet every single person in Ontario, every jurisdiction, all 124 ridings, hear what they have to say, he said. That's the most important group of people, and hopefully we'll have a strong mandate moving on in negotiations. An internal memo sent Wednesday to senior staffers in the Ford government from the Premier's Chief of Staff, Patrick Sackville, says minister's office could appoint a caretaker team to oversee the government's day-to-day business during the campaign. The memo obtained by the Globe and Mail says the caretaker staffers will not be taking any new decisions on behalf of the government, but would be called upon to stop actions deemed contrary to cabinet direction. Mr. Ford's PCs have also scheduled a meeting on Saturday for a super caucus of MPPs, that's members of provincial parliament, candidates and local campaign managers at a Toronto area hotel to talk strategy. The Premier's main opponents, official opposition NDP leader Merritt Stiles and Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie, have both charged that an early election is unnecessary. They say that instead of going out on the campaign trail, Mr. Ford should recall the legislator now on an extended winter break and focus on dealing with Mr. Trump's threats. Now, I actually agree with that. I actually agree with that because, as you're about to see here, uh, Ford already kind of has this mandate. He doesn't need to have this election. He's currently the Premier of Ontario. He currently stands in lead with the other members of Parliament. He's currently in the lead. So you already have the people behind your back to push you and elevate you to move forward with negotiations, but you haven't done it. You haven't done it. The only thing you have done is complain and whine and whine and complain and turn this into a freak show circus that doesn't need to be. It does not need to be. At least Daniel Smith, the Premier of Alberta, went to Donald Trump himself and made an argument, made a case to defend Canada. And what did Doug Ford do? Doug Ford, and like the other premiers and the other members of the federal government, slammed Daniel Smith. Oh, you're just protecting Alberta's interests. No, Alberta's interest is Canada's interest. Our natural resources and our energy comes from that province. So if we lose Alberta and Alberta energy gets tariff or what have you, that's going to put a major impact on the rest of the country. That's why Daniel Smith was able to go down there and make a strong argument, and that's why you have the extension of February 1st to begin with. So, goes on to say they have also accused him of trying to win another 4-year mandate before a cost-cutting conservative government takes power in a federal election just months away, or before any charges emerge from the RCMP investigation into his aborted move to allow developers to build housing on parts of the protected Greenbelt. Mr. Ford won a majority of the Ontario's legislative seats for the second time in June 2022, just 2.5 years ago. The next election date under provincial legislation is currently fixed for June 6th. But since last spring, the Premier has pointedly declined to rule out calling it an early vote. In recent weeks, he has said he needs a new mandate from Ontarians to launch a COVID-19 style aid package with tens of billions of dollars in spending to help workers and businesses affected by Mr. Trump's tariffs. Which kind of seems like the opposite of where he got elected into the province to control the spending. Because after Kathleen Wynne, who was the last premier, the Liberal leader at that time, in her exorbitant spending to the point that the debt has tripled and quadrupled under those years, Doug Ford was elected to cut back on that. And since he's been in power for this amount of time, he has added more to the debt. He hasn't clamped down. He hasn't made fiscal responsibility. He's made it worse. Made the situation worse. Like he's doing with this. Making the situation worse instead of actually having a cohesive argument to go to Mr. Trump, to go to Mr. Art the Deal himself and make a business proposal to say why you shouldn't tariff on Canadian goods. And we'll do the same. We'll reciprocate. Just like Daniel Smith said, you don't put tariffs on energy on Canadian energy, and we won't put tariffs on, military equipment. We'll buy from you and you buy from us. That's how trade negotiations work. And it just seems like nobody else in this perspective is doing any of that. Nobody else is really doing any of that. So, again, I wanted to show this because calling an early election and needing a mandate just kind of seems redundant on the fact that Premier Doug Ford already has viability, already has the popularity. He already has a huge win over the Liberal and the NDP governments in Ontario. So, Abacus data says Doug Ford and Ontario PC's lead by 18 points over Bonnie Crombie, Ontario Liberals. If an election were held today, 43% of the committed voters in Ontario would vote PC. So, You already have a standing lead. There's not even a point to having this election. It's different if it was the federal response to this because the conservatives are in a high lead according to polling, but you know you can trust the polls at this point. Polls can be subjective, polls can be biased. You don't know. That's why it's always good to check. But the conservatives have a huge lead against Justin Trudeau, and Justin Trudeau is still in power. So, yes, it makes sense that they're going to want to call for an early election if they know the people want a different course of the legislator and the federal response. But provincially, you're already on top. You're already on top. The people already adore you. The people already respect you. Even with your qualms, even with your insanity, even with your scandals that we all know about, that we criticize harshly about, Duns Ford still has the top margin of many individuals, and yet he wants to call for a snap election. It seems so stupid. It really seems so stupid. And all you have to do is just respond to your people. You don't have to call for an election to get a mandate from people. You just do the job. You just do the job. Okay? You know the tariffs are approaching. You know that Donald Trump takes things seriously. You know that Daniel Smith is trying to negotiate and extend this deal, extend this out to give you some leverage. Now it's your turn. Now it's your turn to build a case and argument to go down to Donald Trump and convince him why you shouldn't be putting tariffs on Canadian goods and vice versa, and negotiate a trade deal, negotiate some sort of situation, because otherwise this is going to diminish Canadian and American relations. This is going to diminish one of the largest trading partners in North America. And it's all because these premiers, these people in government, just act so foolish. They just act so childish. Oh, well, if you're going to put tariffs on this, then I'm going to put tariffs on that. And I'm going to take bottles of booze out of the LCBO. Ha 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 ha! Retaliatory force. Ah! Instead of actually being the adult in the room and saying, hey, you're proposing this, we counter that proposal with our own suggestion. And they build upon that. And it actually works. It actually works. Trump responds to negotiations, regardless of how people feel about him, regardless of how people, subjugate him and his character and what kind of person he is. I know I have criticism on him. I'm not a supporter of his, but I know one thing's for sure, and that gives me a little bit of hope and optimism, is that Donald Trump is willing to hear an argument. Donald Trump is the kind of businessman that's willing to hear people out, and if people have a strong enough argument, he's willing to give them a chance. That's what happened with Daniel Smith. That's what happened with other people that he made a proposal, he made deals to kind of make a win-win situation. He was trying to do that with the ceasefire deal. That kind of backfired because Netanyahu is just a insane war criminal and doesn't care about anything. But we can do this with the tariff war. We can easily avoid all this. Easily avoid all this without having to go through the snafu, insane circus dilemma of retaliatory tariffs, you know, shutting businesses and ripping products off the shelves, and now calling for a snap election to mandate something that people have already put you in power for. You just got to listen to the people. You got to actually just do your job instead of running around doing campaign promises again, just to gain back some popularity that you may have lost. Just do your job. That's all you have to do, Doug Ford. Do your damn job. That's it. That's all you have to do.